Hi, today we are going to examine and discuss the fundamental philosophy of the Women's Federation for World Peace. And their philosophy is called Godism. And you may wonder the relationship between this title, Godism, and a subtitle, Let's Discover the Authentic Self. You may think, I am here and so as an individual who lives here and do daily things. But when you speak of God, God is something else. So you may feel one thing, some distance or discrepancy between the speaking of God and speaking of yourself. But through a series of lectures today, we are going to show you or think together of the identity between these two issues, God and the authentic self. In other words, discovery of the authentic self is at the same time the discovery of God. And the discovery of God is at the same time the discovery of the authentic self. This is one of the basic themes we are going to discuss throughout the series of lectures today. And now, let's begin lecture 1. Authentic self and conscience. And we want to start the discussion by thinking the relationship between the truth and the self. Do you think something called truth exists? Yes, probably so. But the question is the relationship between the self and the truth. Let me rephrase the question again. Is the truth reside, does the truth reside within yourself? Or does the truth exist outside of yourself? In other words, the location of the truth the location of the truth is within yourself or outside of the self. In other words, do you think that entire philosophical truth resides within yourself? Or philosophical truth is something else outside of yourself and you are seeking for? Let's examine this point. Okay, let's say if you have all the truth within yourself, so discovery of the truth is at the same time discovery of yourself. Suppose you have all the truth within yourself. If this is the case, we may encounter the following difficulty. Namely, if you have entire truth within yourself, why do you have to seek the truth again? But as a matter of fact, you are seeking for the truth. And we cannot answer this question. But if you don't have anything within yourself, something called truth. And the entire truth is a product of social agreement and a common sense that is a product of social interactions. And you just observe these common opinions and form something called truth. If this is the case, and if you have nothing, something called truth, or no standard of truth within yourselves, then here we encounter another difficulty. In the world, there are seemingly true things, and thousands of people appeared on the earth and claimed themselves as a person who speaks of the truth. Here are abundant opinions, and there are many truth claimers. However, among many seemingly true things, certainly you choose one or some of them. And you say, yes, your opinion sounds good, but there is something wrong in your opinions. Or in other occasions you may say, oh yes, that is right, what you said is true. In that way, at every occasion, you make value judgment. Upon which standard? Upon yourself. In other words, you, at every occasion, you make your own value judgment, and you are the person who makes decisions. So, the truth seems to be residing in yourself, but seems to be residing outside of yourself, and we do not know. Let's discuss this point further, and how philosophers encountered these problems and tried to solve this question. Here is the self. You may have a certain truth within yourself. Without having truth, you can make no judgment whatsoever. But in fact, you make value judgment, and you make certain decisions on values, good, evil, truth, and falsity, and so forth. However, we are not aware of something we have. So, in a sense, each individual may have implicit understanding about yourself, and each person has implicit understanding of the truth which reside within yourself. But we are not aware of the fact. So some philosopher have already discovered this point. And let's take some examples. For instance, Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers in ancient Greece. He thought the task of a philosopher is like a midwife. So he engaged in numerous dialogues with those who seems to know things well. And he asked things. And he, through a series of dialogues, what he aimed at is the discovery of the truth by the opponent of his dialogues. In other words, teaching of philosophy is not giving certain information as if he gives something material thing to somebody else. Teaching of philosophy is not giving a piece of information from one person to another. Rather, what has to be done is the discovery within that person. So enlightenment is something that takes place within the opponent of the dialogues. So this is some happening. This is something that takes place within that person. So in other words, he discovers within himself something. That is the point Socrates is aiming at through a series of dialogues. Let's take modern philosopher, one of the greatest philosophers in the 20th century, Martin Heidegger. He has a similar understanding of philosophical truth. Every human being has implicit understanding of philosophical truth. And the task of philosophy is to bring this implicit understanding explicit. In other words, to bring implicit knowledge into a linguistic expression. That is the task of philosophy. Let me summarize my point. Philosophical truths reside within each individual, within yourself. Let me expand this point further. What do you think of understanding? What is this phenomenon called understanding? What is understanding? Understanding is some happening or something takes place. It is an event or happening. Something happens. Well, when you engage in some certain disciplines, and suppose you try to solve some mathematical questions, and you think and you ponder, and all of a sudden, like a flash of light, you get the idea. Oh, I see. What is this? I see. That is a happening. It is an event, not a thing. Like a spark of light, you see a light within yourself. So, if you do not have some kind of foundation within yourself, understanding of a philosophical truth does not take place at all. So, as part of your understanding some philosophical truth, you already have the entire philosophical truth within yourself in certain form. So, we would say, rather, you may have implicit understanding of the entire philosophical truth within yourself, but you are not aware of it. Some philosopher, like Augustine, has already discovered this point. And in the work entitled The True Teacher, he makes the following point. Each person has the teacher within. He called it inner truth, or sometimes he called it inner Christ, since he's a Christian. Every person has the inner truth, and which functions as the teacher within. So when you hear something from outside, you consult with the teacher within, and you make value judgment. So whenever you hear something, and you get information, and you always you consult with the teacher within yourself, then you make value judgment. Yes, this is true. Oh no, this is not true. This is right, or this is not right, or this is just, or this is unjust. In that way, we have certain standard or some factor or element within yourself upon which you make value judgment. And this element within yourself by which you make value judgment is called conscience. As a matter of fact, the word conscience is a very popular word, and you may take it for granted. However, if we put this term in a broader context, we can see the linkage between the goodwill of Immanuel Kant or Heidegger's voice of conscience. Which are the decisive factors in their moral philosophies. In other words, to speak of the moral philosophy or moral judgment, each person has to have a conscience. Let me expand this concept of conscience further by discussing the second topic, good and evil. In ancient Greek, we have the more than three greatest philosophers in Western philosophy. Who are the greatest in Western philosophy? You can name many philosophers, but among those, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are certainly the greatest among many philosophers in the Western philosophy. They laid the philosophical foundation of Western philosophy and before the birth of Jesus Christ. And it is quite interesting to notice that Plato is a direct disciple of Socrates, and Aristotle is the direct disciple of Plato. What's a coincidence? These three great teachers appeared in the same area and at the same period of human history. What a great coincidence. But at any rate, Socrates didn't write any book, as you may know, and his student Plato wrote about his teachers. And these two, as a matter of fact, we cannot distinguish which teaching belongs to Socrates and which teachings belong to Plato. We do not know. So we leave it aside and go into the discussion. Professional rhetoricians, teachers of discussions, rhetorics, are called sophists. And they are the main targets of dialogue between Socrates and the sophists, with those who Socrates are engaged in. And the sophists believed in factor decisive in human life is appearance as opposed to true reality. They said appearance counts, not true reality. And they said good and evil are nothing but interpretations. What do you think about their ideas? Do you think appearance is decisive and important? Or rather, true reality is important? How do you think? Or you may say, appearance is one thing, but the true reality is more important, you may say. Do you live in that way, in fact? Or let me ask you something. Suppose here is a party, and at the end of the party, there are leftover bottles of Cokes or drinks or something. And you look around, and there is no one. So you put 1 dozen of Cokes or drinks or something into a bag. Oh yeah, I can drink later. And you carry it in and go outside. And all of a sudden, you fall. And suppose all bottles spread all over the floors. And those participants at the party looked upon you and, oh, what kind of person he is? You will be certainly very embarrassed. If no one knows what you're doing, you feel security, and you will not be embarrassed at all. But simply because of the fact that you are seen, you are embarrassed. There are many, many things that you do not behave because of your appearance. Let me take another example from the old myth, from the ancient myth. Here is a magic ring, it is said, and if you put this magic ring into your fingers, you will disappear. You will become transparent person. Nobody can see you, right? And if you disappeared, in other words, your appearance disappeared. You are there, but you become transparent person. Then, what kind of behavior would you do? Do you do good things? Or do you do something you desired most, but you did not do because you have a physical appearance. According to the story of that ancient myth, man behaved badly. Man did terrible things that he did not do because of his appearances. You think about this story and you engage in this practice of thinking yourself and find out who you are yourself. And sophists claimed that good and evil is a matter of interpretations. So they teach how to make evil things appear good. In contrast to their opinions, Socrates and Plato claimed that true reality is decisively important and not the appearance, and it is not the case that good and evil is a matter of interpretation. Rather, good reigns the entire human activities from above. And how does Socrates prove this point? That is very interesting. So Socrates asked a question to sophists, and since they are the professional rhetoricians, they can reply smoothly and they can speak well. And Socrates addresses a series of questions. What is good? What is justice? And they say justice is exemplified in such cases as this and that. Socrates says and replies, "Oh, I see, that is an example of justice. But what is the essence of justice?" They try to answer this and that. But since Socrates is quite good at asking questions, sometimes they can't reply and they get angry. At the end of a dialogue, what is disclosed there is this point. Since they are the professional rhetoricians, they are good at making excuses and making cases out of it. In other words, all their theories are created for the sake of justification of their claims. And this is the point. What is it? This is this. Why? Why human beings try to defend themselves and try to put themselves on the just argument? In other words, why man has to concern with justice itself? Or to put in other way, goodness or justice or correctness or rightness. Why do you have to be so concerned about justice or goodness? Entire justification or defense is aimed at to prove that you are just, right? Think about yourself. You do things good and bad, right? Sometimes you do good things, and sometimes you do bad things. But no matter what you do, always you try to defend yourselves. Yes, you may do bad things, terrible things you can't describe. And after that, what would you do? You try to defend yourself. Oh, yes, I did this and that. But because of so and so. The question is this. Question is, why do you want to justify yourself? If you do not have certain engagement with the sense of justice prior to actual deeds, you do not have to justify what you have done. So before you do engage in all kinds of human behaviors, you have already certain deep relationship with the sense of justice prior to your deeds. It doesn't matter what you did is good or evil. It doesn't matter. Regardless of actual contents of your behavior, every time you behave, whenever you do something, you try to justify your deeds and actions. Sometimes you blame your environment, economical or social environment. You blame your poverty, or your parents, or education, or this and that. But by blaming that, what you're doing? All you're doing is to try to justify your deeds. So in this justification, acts of justification, we see the reign of good, reign of goodness. So you have prior engagement with the sense of justice or the sense of good. Because of this engagement, no matter what you do, you try to justify yourself. Now, and this tendency within yourself to try to justify yourself is called conscience. Conscience, because of this orientation, functions as a teacher or mentor in your value judgment and in your moral behaviors. Certainly, when you are small, parents tell you what to do and what not to do. And your teacher may tell you what to do and what not to do. But you have within yourself something called conscience, and which functions as if they are teachers and parents. And they guide you, it guides you in your every value judgment and moral judgment. And no matter what you do, conscience, in a sense, transcends yourself. Let me expand this point. Okay, you have a conscience, and a conscience has prior orientation toward good or just or moral correctness or whatsoever. And you may find within yourself certain conflict between what the conscience tells you to do And as a matter of fact, what you wanted due to your bodily desires. Bodily desires want to satisfy your own needs, and sometimes at the expense of others, at the sacrifice of others, and at the expense of others, the benefit of others. You may want to satisfy yourself. And at the same time, your conscience tells you that is no good. In that way, you may find a conflict between what your conscience tells you to do and your bodily desire are telling you to do. And when you did something terrible, what you're doing is try to persuade conscience so that you can do whatever you want, right? When you do terrible things, you please think about yourself and look at yourself. See, when you do terrible things and a series of terrible things, you try to tell your conscience, please, be quiet. You know, I'm not such a great person, so can you shut your mouth a bit so that I can do whatever I want to do? But conscience never give up. It never gives up yourself. And it always with you, and it always tell you what to do. In this sense, conscience is the greatest teacher you have. And they function like a parents. As the parents tell you what to do and what not to do when you are small, likewise, whenever you go, conscience is with you, and it tells you, no, you shouldn't do that, or you should do this. In that way, always conscience is the greatest guide in your soul, especially in the matter of good and evil. It tells you what is good and what is wrong. Furthermore, when you encounter something, you can make decisions and value judgment due to the guidance of your own conscience, which will never be persuaded by evil deeds you do, and it rejects your persuasions. Regardless of justification and persuasion, conscience stands within itself and transcend yourself. So let me make 2 points. First, conscience is, in a sense, the greatest teacher and functions as if they are parents to you. It guides you and leads you, and the betterment, it desires the betterment of yourself. So in the sense, it functions as a divine being. You may say this is a second God, or it functions like a God to you. And the second point, conscience transcends yourself. Regardless of your persuasion, conscience exists as something transcend yourself. Let me tell you this point further. Okay, conscience is one of the essential constituents of something called yourself. Without conscience, you can't be yourself. However, the way conscience exists is not as something, one element you can do whatever you want. In other words, conscience exists something beyond within yourself. So you have something within, at the same time beyond. This transcendent this nature of transcendence or beyond yourself is one of the decisive and essential features of conscience. To speak in a concrete language, because you have now conscience exists within yourself. However, regardless of your persuasion and regardless of your request, conscience never changes in its orientation toward goodness and righteousness. Actual interpretation of good and evil may change. However, this fundamental, essential orientation toward goodness and rightness and justice never changes. Without that, you can never make just moral judgment. And furthermore, justice of society can never be established without this pre-foundation of each human being. And when we examine human being, we have some other transcendent elements within ourselves. They are the constituents of our being, and at the same time, they are transcendent to ourselves. First, conscience. Yes, certainly without this, conscience, you can't be a human being. Second, life. Without being alive, you are a dead man. You are a skeleton. Third, love. Human life is a series of exercises of love. What do you mean you are living? You do many things, and you are engaged in a variety of activities while you are living on the earth. You may do business, you may be engaged in political activities or intellectual activities and so on and so on. But throughout a series of acts and practices of human life on the earth, in its essence, at the end of death, at the end of life, what are you going to bring in the world afterlife if you have? Certainly, behind the variety of activities, physical activities come and go. But what you can sustain after the variety of activity is the contents of love, in the broadest sense of the term. Your care to the country may drive you to the contribution and prosperity of your country. Your love for your own tribe may have made you the greatest deeds. And your care and love for the world may have made you the world politicians. In that way, in a variety of ways, you are already engaged in a variety of various kinds of love. You love not only for your spouse, but to your children and your people and your country and your religion and the world. And more than that, your love to divine being may have made you the greatest human being on the earth. In that way, regardless of the contents of your activities on life, certainly we can see these activities from the perspective of love. These activities are nothing but the practices of love of various kinds. In that sense, life is nothing but a practice of love in the broadest sense of the term. And the fourth is blood lineage. Not many philosophers took this theme as a philosophical theme. Most of the philosophers did not pay attention to this point, except probably Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the greatest German philosophers. But when you think about the identity of yourself, blood lineage is certainly very important. When you think about inheritance, for instance, authenticity or justification of inheritance is based upon this blood lineage. Blood lineage determines, for the most part, who you are, and in a deep unconscious level, it gives great impact on your thinking. Suppose you have a drop of blood from Indian ancestors with yourself. Suppose you have a grandfather who is a certain tribe of Indians. And this fact itself may give you the great effect in your unconscious realm. You may have a common feeling with Indian tribes, and you may care Indian people because of the fact that you have a great Indian grandfather or something. These four elements, conscience, life, love, and blood lineage, are the fundamental constituents of something called yourself. Think about justice of the laws. How would you judge good and bad or just and unjust in societies? Certainly you may judge just and unjust based upon certain laws. However, what is the philosophical foundation for the justification of the justness of laws? Why certain law is just, and you can rely upon, and you just accept the justice of certain laws, or certain rules, or certain taboos, and so forth. When we carefully examine a variety of laws in human society, we can see these four elements are the functioning and the fundamental values in a variety of legal systems. When human violates one of these, it is considered as bad or evil or something wrong. prior to human interpretation or prior to human judgment, these four elements are valued most, more than anything else in human society and in human life. In other words, when you make some mistakes or violate the principle of one of these elements, you can't compensate by making justifications between yourself and a certain some authority in human society. Okay, you can say suppose you did something terrible, right? Then you may be justified, you may said innocent in the legal system of the society. However, you cannot escape moral guilt feeling if you violated one of these. Suppose you killed somebody else, some innocent person, or suppose you betrayed love of whom you cared most. Even if, suppose, you are innocent in that legal system, still you may be accused by your own conscience. And where do you bring this question of guilt? Where do you bring this to? Certainly, in many cases, you will bring these questions not to the human court of justice, but you often bring this to the court of justice, something higher than humans, namely divine realm. In other words, these four elements are transcendent, and divine element within yourself. Each human, each individual has divine sphere or divine realm within yourself, transcendent realm or divine realm. And your authentic self. Is discovered by the recognition and by the awareness of this fact. Namely, these four elements are nothing but divine elements and the divine realm, which is originated from divine being. In that sense, human being is at the same time divine being. To speak precisely, human being has divine elements within yourself that is transcendent yourself. Since they are the divine element and the divine factors, they are the things that are valued most within yourself and within human society. So, I'd like to conclude this lecture by pointing out this point. We human beings, each individual has the authentic self within yourself. And although you are not aware of what that is, certainly you have implicit awareness of the fact that you have the authentic self. Regardless of your daily activities, you have within yourself fundamental conviction that your authentic self is something other than what you are now. You have a moral conviction, you have a deep conviction within your soul. And the source of this conviction is the existence of the authentic self. And this authentic self is constituted of the four elements which have divine origins. In this sense, authentic self The discovery of authentic self is at the same time the discovery of the divine nature within yourself. And the question of divine and human and interrelationship between the divine and human is an intricate and very sensitive issue we have to study further. Now, we have given, and I have given you a short talk on this topic, but there are thousands of things that we have to examine, and we have to think, and we have to study. Thank you very much.